Hello, everyone, and welcome to PMI Northeast Ohio's Tech Thursday webinar series. Today, we have our guest speakers, Charles Emmy, who is here to talk to us today about supercharging your Excel skills with VBA Automation. This is a monthly webinar series that we hold every third Thursday of the month with a focus on project management tools and techniques. Our webinar our next webinar is on August 20th. That is going to be on Microsoft Teams in project management world, and you can register for that on the PMI Northeast Ohio's events page. We're also starting a strategy and leadership webinar series, so if that sounds of interest to you, you can also register for those over there as well. Please do check those out. I just want to remind everybody that this event also entitles you to 1 hour of technical PDU for those of you that already have a credential. We'll be providing those towards the end of the presentation, so hang around and we'll hand those out. We also want to just invite anybody to ask questions at any time. You can submit those through the Q&A feature or the chat feature. We'll actively be monitoring both. We also do record this webinar series and we make them available on our chapter website. So if you have missed any of our previous webinars or you would like to catch up on this webinar, or if you missed something, you can visit the PMI Northeast Ohio's website and check them out over there. And finally, I just want to remind everybody that you guys get a survey at the end of the presentation. Like always, we always appreciate the responses and help us continue in adding content of coming up with topics for future webinar series. So we really appreciate the responses on those. Now, jumping over to the speaker, and I'll keep this brief and let him do most of the talking, but Charles has over 20 years of IT integration and project management experience in a wide variety of industries. At Xerox Corporation, he was involved in implementing complex business processes and workflows. He is also the sole proprietor of Best Project Management in Ohio, which is based locally. And he also holds Scrum Foundation and Agile Master Certification from VMU, and was previously certified as a Microsoft Systems Engineer. In addition to that, he is also currently prepping for his PMI ACP certification. So he's very familiar with the chapter and their work. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll let Charles take over from here. And over to you, Charles.
Okay, can you see my screen?
It's not up for me yet. Oh, there we go. It's up now.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you. I'm very honored to be able to speak to everybody today, and I'm glad you've joined. My name's Charles Emmy. As was mentioned, I am a project manager for quite some time, since about 2000. Mostly working, most of that time working at Xerox. Though I was working at Xerox, I was primarily focused on business process, content services, and anytime Xerox had a project where we had to do complex integrations between Xerox systems and client systems, they'd bring me in as I had a lot of infrastructure experience where some of the homegrown Xerox project managers were more focused on managed print and that kind of thing. I have been doing some coding in very small format since the very start of my career after I finished college. In fact, my first internship, I was using Visual Basic and automated a document process application for them to process pre-employment screening applications for a company that did that service for other companies. I don't want to spend too much time because I'd like, the time limitations is going to keep this tight, and I'd like to ensure that you get a good opportunity to see how kind of to format Excel VBA, which would be kind of the last topic at the end that we'll talk about. So with that, that's a little bit about me. We'll get right into it, and we'll talk about what VBA is. VBA stands for Visual Basic for Applications. Essentially, it is an offshoot of the Visual Basic programming language that was started in the late 1990s. It's an implementation of their event-driven programming language, Visual Basic 6, which is now legacy. And though it can be used with all Microsoft Office applications, it's most commonly used with Microsoft Excel and Access. And people use it essentially to automate application functionality and tasks that you would perform that tend to get repetitive in those applications and can be automated. What can it do for you? Well, as a beginner, probably what you would most use it for is simply to automate those routine or repetitive tasks that you have to do a lot, and that you can use macros to record what you do and find the code, and I'll show you how to do that. But VBA can be very advanced for you as well. You can automate very complex tasks. You can generate Microsoft Word forms within Excel. You can even send emails out of Excel. You can even create powerful programs that are powered by Visual Basic for Applications in Excel or Access, or really even PowerPoint for that matter. I am actually in the process of just to see that I can do it, creating my own project management information system that's powered solely by Excel. And if we get a lot of interest, feel free to comment on the YouTube post when they get this recording posted up on YouTube. If people would be interested, I might be willing to do a YouTube series as I go through building that system, and treat that as a way to further everyone's knowledge on VBA. So what is a macro in Excel, and how does it apply to Visual Basic for Applications? Well, probably most people who use Excel know what a macro is, but the macro tool allows the user to record and play back steps or tasks that you perform or take in Excel. They save you time by automating repetitive tasks, but it can also be used, believe it or not, to actually create the VBA code for you. Many of the things that I do in Excel using VBA, I have no idea how to code, but I do know how to do them within Excel. And you can use the macro recorder tool to actually record what you're doing, and it'll put that into VBA code for you so that you can use it in your VBA code. And we'll touch on that here in just a little bit. We need to talk, if we're going to talk about Visual Basic for Applications, you need to understand what the VBA Editor is. And the VBA Editor is what allows you to write code. I'm going to switch over to Excel real quick. But you have in Excel, you have your normal menus up here, and something that if you've never done anything with Excel with VBA, this developer option might not be here for you. To get to it, you would go to your Excel options, and on the customize ribbon, there is, well, it's already on the right for me, but it would be over here on the left, and you can select that and add it over to your customized ribbon, and it'll put that there for you. But when you click on that, you get some options that you can use within your VBA editing experience. And the Visual Basic Editor actually comes up when you click the Visual Basic button. And that brings up the window that will show your VBA code if you have any. And we're going to, in this session, we're going to write a little bit of VBA code, very small little bit due to time restraints. And it'll show up in what are called modules within VBA. And I've got some other VBA that if we have time, I'll show you real quick. But the code ends up looking, you know, something like this. And you can see when you even write macros, it'll come up in a module of its own, just like this as well. And you'll see that here in a moment. I also need to explain real quickly something called option explicit. There is a tool or a setting that can be used within the VBA Editor. You can go to Tools and Options, and you can click this Require Variable Declaration. What that does is it'll automatically put this term called option explicit at the top of every module that's written. But what option explicit does is essentially saves you a lot of headaches when you are writing code. And it requires you to declare your variables. And we'll talk about what variables are in a moment, but Excel has gotten very smart, and VB has gotten very smart as well. So it recognizes variables nowadays without needing to declare them. But what that means is you might mean to use a variable called counter, but you spell it wrong, C-O-U-N-T-R-E. And VB now recognizes that as a new variable because you're not required to declare them. So when that happens, it just may do nothing with that variable and you don't know why your code's not working. So if you force yourself to declare your variables using option explicit, that'll save you a lot of headaches and troubleshooting buggy code. Remember that, and we'll see it again here in a moment. So that's a good segue. I want to talk about real briefly some of the one of the people that I learned at, and I'll give you some information on his YouTube channel as a great place to learn, to further learn Microsoft VBA. He calls them foundational VBA coding concepts, and really they're foundational coding concepts. Most of these exist in pretty much every programming language out there. And the first of these that we'll talk about are variables. In VBA, you declare a variable using the dim command. Dim is short for dimension, and it reserves a space in memory for a variable that you can assign something to. So a variable is a symbol or reference that represents a quantity or a function that may assume any given value or set of values. That's from dictionary.com. I thought they had a great definition. In VBA, we use text or letters to represent the variable name. So text like counter or XYZ is a variable name to represent something. An example that we'll be doing today, we'll use counter as one of our variables to represent an integer. There are many types of variables. They can be strings, they can, which is a series of letters or numbers or any kind of character that you can put into a string. It can be integers. An integer is a whole number up to about, I believe it is 32,000 in VBA. A long is an integer up to something like 1.3 billion. A double is lets you use decimal points. You can also use variable as a variable type. In Excel, when you don't use option explicit, Excel considers every variable a variable type, if that makes sense. So if you declare, for example, dim counter as variable, you can make counter an integer, you can make it a string, you can make it a double, you can make it anything. The reason people don't use that for everything is it takes up quite a bit more memory. The syntax to use it in VBA is dim, as we mentioned up here, what your variable name is. So for example, counter as whatever your variable type. So dim counter as integer would be to dimension a variable called counter in memory that we're going to store integers in. The next foundational concept we want to talk about are for and next loops. These exist also in most programming languages that are out there. And what it does is allows you to loop through a line of code or many lines of VBA code, saving you time. So for example, the syntax here is for counter. There's our counter that we dimensioned in the previous screen. For counter equals 1 to 10. And then you have a line of code or many lines of code within your for and next loop. You always start with a for and end with a next. So the first time that it goes through this loop, it'll assign 1 to the variable counter. It'll do whatever's in the the code in between. In this case, it'll bring up a message box with an OK button, and it'll display what is in the variable counter. So the first time it through the loop, it'll just bring up a message box with the number 1 with an OK button. You hit OK, it sees next counter, and next counter means it knows that it needs to go to the next number, 2 in this case, and it'll message box 2 with an OK button. And it'll do that 10 times. When counter is 10, it'll realize there's nothing left in the counter loop, and it'll go on to the next line of code below. I know I'm going through these kind of quickly, and I'm doing so that we have more time to see these in action in a little bit, but I want to pause real quick and see if anyone has any questions so far.
We have not had any questions, but I do have one of my own. I know you said that this integrates across Microsoft software, and I just want to see how it integrates with some of the newer things that are coming out with Office 365. Is that something within those applications? Is VBA part of that? Is that how it works?
Yeah, there is some new functionality within Office 365 and VBA that I haven't particularly learned yet. All of my experience has been with previous versions of Excel. However, all of this code that I've written for today's function, pretty much everything that worked before will work in Office 365, but there will be some new things in Office 365. And, you know, as always, Microsoft new and better things that work with Office 365.
Okay.
Okay, then our next foundational concept, another way to loop through code or understand some things that are going on within your code is the if, then, and else, statement. And what if, then, and else allows you to do is to check for a condition in your program or your worksheet and then act on that condition. For example, thinking about the previous example we just used, if we had within that loop, if you had if counter equals 5, then do something. So another line of code here, for example, if counter equals 5, then message box, congratulations, you hit number 5, and end if. So VBA will evaluate this statement. If counter is not equal to 5, it's not going to do a thing. It'll see it's not equal to 5, so it'll ignore this code, see that there is an end if statement, and go on to the next line of code, which in our previous example might be the next counter statement. So it'll go back and increment counter by 1, and then and then reevaluate this until it finds 5. Then it'll do something. Once it hits 6, it'll do nothing again all the way through the end of that loop. So you don't need the else statement is optional. The then statement is mandatory. You must have the then statement, but the else statement allows you to do something else if it's not equal to that. So for example, if your counter equals 5, then you do something else, you do something else, and then end if that statement. So again, the if, the then, and the end if are mandatory. The else is optional. And just like the for and next loop, this do something, you can have 1 line of code there, you can have 100 lines of code there. And it'll perform those lines of code only if your condition is met. One more foundational concept I want to talk about, and this is a little bit more in depth, and it's very important. This is maybe a little bit more advanced, but it's important to what we're doing today because everything you do in Excel is dependent on where you want to do it. And so that means your cell positioning, where what cell, for example, there it is, you have selected. So if I'm selecting cell D14 and clicking on that, that's the same as VBA code to actually select that cell or a range of cells. or an array of cells, for example. Cell positioning allows you to take a cell and either reference a cell directly, or using a command called offset, which we'll talk about here in a moment, referencing a cell with a certain offset. So offsetting by 2 rows and 2 columns, giving you D15 instead of B13, for example. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about cell positioning, telling Excel what cell you're asking it to look at, to select, to do something to. And the first of these is range, and that tells Excel the specific location that you want to look at. Range can be a single cell, or it can be a range of cells, so don't let the name fool you. It's talking about what range, even if it's only one cell, that you're telling Excel to look at. And going hand in hand very often with range is the select. That's telling Excel that you want to select a particular cell or a range of cells, for example. Just like you were clicking on that cell or highlighting a range of cells. That's actually selecting those cells. And the example of that would be message box. The value of cell A5 is the ampersand. What that does is it concatenates text for you. Then the range command, range A5, looks at what's in cell A5 and prints that out. Dot value. Sorry, the dot value is what tells it to look at what's in cell A5. The range A5 just tells you what cell, just tells Excel which cell you're talking about. So in this case, range A5 dot value means it's looking at cell A5 and what the value is within that cell. In this case, January 1st, 2020. So this, in using this particular worksheet, with this exact text, it would say that bring up a message box with an OK button saying the value of cell A5 is January 1st, 2020. I did a poor job, I guess. It's not an example of select, but an example of select would be instead of all this, range quotes A5 dot select. And what that would do is it would select it just as if you were clicking on cell A5. It would put the box around there, and that's what cell is selected and active at this moment. This probably brings up a good point of a good segue of some things we probably need to talk about. I had mentioned at the beginning that VBA is an offshoot of their object-oriented programming language, Visual Basic 6. VBA isn't exactly object-oriented, but it does use some object-oriented concepts. And I want to introduce you to what object-oriented is in programming languages so that you kind of understand some of the next concepts I'm going to talk about. And the dot select is a good example of this, and it'll become clear here in a moment. So in object-oriented programming, an object is best described as something. And let's use a real-world example of that and say a tree is our object. So a tree out there is an object. A branch is also something, and it would be a child object of that tree. In Excel, a worksheet might be our tree, so a worksheet is an object, while a cell or a range of cells might be a child object of that worksheet. In our current topic of range, select, range and select, range is our object of concern. Now, a property is something that describes the object. So using our example, we have our object of a tree with a child object of a branch, and a child object of the branch, which is a leaf, might have properties of, say, having smooth edges or jagged edges. A value, in this case, is a property of the range object. So it describes what's in that range. So using our previous example of range A5 dot value, what's describing the range of A5 is what is in it. And in that case, it was January 1st, 2020. Now, objects can also have methods. A method is an action that an object can perform. So in our example that we've been talking about, select is the method. So range A5.select. Select is something that range can do. It can select that range. This might be a little bit complex, so I want to pause again and see if there are any questions on this part.
We do have a question, but it is more about integrating across apps.
Sure.
The question is if VBA works across integrates with things like Planner.
There are, believe it or not, there are usually APIs or which are application programming interfaces that for almost everything that will work. I can't speak to Planner specifically since I've never actually looked that up. But for example, you would think that something that wouldn't work, I said that you can send email earlier in this presentation. And obviously, you know, across applications, you would expect that to work with Microsoft Outlook. But there are ways that you can send emails from your Google account as well. There are certain things out there on the web. They're usually called REST APIs, and they're a way of calling something from within your Visual Basic Code that's out there on the web that will allow you to do what you want. And I suspect that Planner is one of those things. And I'd have to say for anything I have ever looked up, can VBA do this? The answer has typically been yes.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And we have also had a comment come in from somebody clarifying kind of the integration of VBA in Office 365. It just kind of a note that there might be different levels of integration with the online versions and then the desktop versions as well. So that's just a comment somebody made. But other than that, no questions. So I think you can keep continuing.
Okay. So moving on in our cell positioning foundational concept, offset is another, this is wrong, I'm sorry, it's actually a method that can be used in reference to the range. It describes how far away from the range that we want to look at or on which to perform an action. It uses two parameters, x and y, where x is the number of rows away and y is the number of columns away. Positive numbers are down or right, while negative numbers are up or left. So for example, range A5 offset 1.0 is one cell down. Oh, I'm sorry, it's I'll fix this before we get this sent out to everybody. It's one cell right from cell A5 and one cell down. So it'd be I'm sorry, it's one cell right. So this would actually be B5. Range A5 offset -1 is actually one cell to the left. Range A5 offset 0, 1, I'll say that you don't have to have a 0 in one of these. So if your range A5 dot offset 1, 1, you're one cell to the right and one cell down. So in that case, it'd be B6. And offset is used very, very extensively to look at cells in relation to whatever cell that you are currently have selected. Move, there we go. Oops. Our last foundational concept I want to talk about, and we've actually talked about it a couple times already, is using message box. Besides just displaying a message, it's often used in VBA code to help you debug. And that is to make sure that you understand what something's doing at a particular point in time. So using our counter, for example, we can message box what that variable is at a particular point in the code, just so you can check to make sure it is what you expect it to be. So your syntax there, excuse me, is message box your message or message box your variable name. There are some other parameters you can add to these that are all optional. For example, the first one which is assumed to be 0, but comma 0 means it just displays your message with an OK button. Comma 1, I believe, has an OK and a cancel button. But you can look those up. You can Google what the syntax is, and I've got some resources at the end that show you where some of these things are. But some optional syntax would be the full syntax is your text string or your variable name, with the types of buttons that you want, the title, which is, if you don't use this, it just says Microsoft Excel at the top of your message box, but you can put whatever you want in there if you use this option. And then there's also a way generally used for more production type of applications, a help file context that would link to a particular help desk file for that message. All right, so let's put all this together, and this is where we start to look at what this can do for you and how maybe it can make your life easy. So I've put together a fictional use case for us. We're approached as a project coordinator on a project, and one of our tasks is to track monthly expenses for several resources associated with a large project. Management has instructed the project management team that there's become an initiative to reduce expenses on the project to 30 to 40%. So they want to see significant cost savings on their expenses. And the way they want to see it is simply a summary of each of several categories of expenses each month that has a simple visual indicator of whether the expense went up or down. After some discussion with management, it was determined that it would be enough to see what the expenses are for each month of tracking, with the cell formatted red for a month in which the expenses went up or got worse, and green if the expenses stayed the same or went down. In other words, they improved. Oops, I didn't mean to hit that button. I'm trigger happy, I guess, today. So let's move over to our Excel spreadsheet, and I've put together some sample data. We've got several months of data. We've been tracking this for a while before management came to us with this. And we've got a few resources on the project, and I've only included about 15 here, but imagine if you had 100 of these and you had to highlight each one red or green based on whether it went up or down. That would start to take up quite a bit of your time every month doing that, or if you had to do it every week, making it even worse. Excuse me. What we want to do is we want to start putting the things together. First, we want to understand what it is that we want to do. And the way to get started is, I've already got one module in here for my other example. If we get time, I'll take a quick peek at that, but we won't go through it. It's quite a bit more advanced. But the first thing that you want to do is within the Visual Basic Editor, again, you get to that by clicking on the Visual Basic button on the Developer tab on your ribbon. And it should bring up something blank if you've got nothing up with other macros or the like. And you want to insert a new module. I wouldn't worry about user forms or class modules at this time. They start to get more advanced. But as you start this journey on your own, user forms are very, very cool. I'd highly suggest looking into them. And we put in a new module, and this gives us a space to write our code. And you'll recall I said the first thing you always want to do if you don't have that option forced in your tools options is to put in your option explicit. And what we are going to do is we are going to analyze essentially this month's or a month's version of value of an expense and compare it to the previous month's version of the expense and determine whether it's higher or lower, so that we can format the cell green. So the next thing, just to know, every macro, every piece of VBA code that you'll write has what's called a subroutine, and it's written as a sub and what your routine name is called. In this case, we'll call it analyze expenses. If you just hit enter, you'll notice that VBA does a couple things for you. it puts in these two parentheses up here, and it puts the end sub, which also has to be there for every module. And all your code for that goes in between these two. So I'll just put in a little bit of extra space. And another good practice to do is to kind of, in your mind, in plain language, determine what it is you want to do. So I'm going to teach you one more thing, and that is the apostrophe in VBA is the same thing as a comment. Anything after an apostrophe in VBA is ignored by the VBA editor. But it allows you to document within the code what it is you're trying to do. That helps you later so that you understood what it was you were trying to do. Or if you're collaborating with others on writing code, it helps them understand what you were trying to do as well. So what we want to do is analyze each category of expense this month versus last month. If expense is more this month, then highlight the cell red. If the expense is equal or less, then we want to highlight the cell green. All right, so now you know what it is that you're trying to do. We'll start putting these things together. So you'll recall one of our first foundational concepts is the for and next loop. Since we have many, in this case only about 15, I think it is. 15, yep. We have 15 expenses categories to analyze. We want to do a piece of code 15 times. You could not, if you liked, don't use the for and next loop, but then you have to write the same code over and over 15 times. So to make that easy on ourselves, we're going to use a for and a next loop. And to do that, first thing we're going to need is a variable for that loop, and we'll use the same one we used in our examples. We'll call it counter, and it only needs to be an integer. And you'll notice as I start typing, Visual Basic for applications realizes what it is I'm starting to do, and it brings up suggestions on things that you can put in there. And you can see we're going to use an integer, but you can see how many options you really have. I mean, there are many, many, many types of things that you can use. But we'll use integer, and we'll set that up right down here. For counter equals 1 to 15. So we have 15 categories. We counted those right here, and we want to use, so we want to run this code 15 times. And so that you don't forget, put in your next counter at the bottom, and we'll put our line of code in there. For readability's sake, I like to indent within loops and within subroutines. So what's the next thing we want to do? We want to look at the expense. We want to analyze these expenses. So if the expense is more this month, then highlight the cell red. There are ways for Excel to find the last like the last row that's used in a table or a spreadsheet or a worksheet, or to find the first one that's not highlighted, for example. But just to make this easy on ourselves, we're going to assume here, assume the user has the first cell in the month highlighted. That'll just make this easier on ourselves for now, but there are ways to get around that. So we want to look at this month's versus last month's, or November's versus December's, for example. 1 month versus the previous month. So to do that, we need to compare 2 more values. So that means we need 2 more variables up here. And we'll do the exact same thing. We'll call it this month as double. Because it's a currency value, we'll need decimal points, so we don't want to use an integer in this case. So we need a value for this month and we need a value for last month. And it's another good coding practice to declare all your variables at the top. You can really declare them anywhere in the code as long as it's before you use them. But good practice, good coding practice in most programming languages I've ever seen anyway, have you declaring them at the top. Okay, so now within our loop, we want to look at what this month's value is versus what last month's value is. So to do that, we need to assign those. Simply declaring them up here doesn't assign those values anything. It just reserves spots in memory for them. So what we'll do is we'll assign them something, and I'm purposely lowercasing this so you can see how smart Excel is. But we want to make this month equal to, and remember I said that we'll assume that the user has the first has the first cell in the month highlighted. So another object, and it's very similar to the select method, is actually the selection object. It's selection as an object is what is currently selected on the spreadsheet. You can either select it previously in VBA code, or as we're doing in this case, assume that the user is selecting that. So we want to use that .value property of the selection object to assign to this month. And you'll notice when I hit enter, it realizes this month was declared previously, so it's going to put that up there for us. We want to do the same thing for last month. Only we don't want to use selection this time. We want to offset that. So we want to offset by -1 row. So we want to look at the previous month. -1 is up 1 row and over none. Excuse me. And then the dot value. So that looks at the cell that's selected, but up 1 row from it. All right. And now we want to compare those two. So what we talked about previously, using something to compare, we have our if, then, and else statement. In this case, I think all we need is if and then. No, we probably will. So we'll set that up. If this month is less than or equal to last month, then, oops. And you'll notice it's smart enough to realize we did something wrong. So we had an extra space in there. And just like the for and X loop, it's a good idea to put your end if there and write your code in between. All right, so if it's less than or equal to last month, we want to make it green. If it's greater than, we want to make it red. Well, here's one of those examples. I don't know how to make it green. So if we don't know how to do something, how do we figure that out? Well, the macro recorder is a wonderful tool in this case. So what we'll do is we'll start the macro recorder. We'll start recording a macro, and we'll call it highlight cell. And hit OK, and it'll start recording. You can see down here that its macro is currently recording. So what we want to do is we want to learn how to highlight something green, and we want to learn how to highlight something red. So the first thing we'll do is we'll highlight something green. Okay, we highlighted that one green. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to highlight something red so that we can learn how to highlight something red. All right, so at this point you want to stop your macro recorder. You can do that a couple ways. hit stop recording here. You can also click down here. It'll stop your recording. And I told you that when you record a macro, it actually inserts VBA code for you. We can look at that. What it did here was it put that code in a new module down here. If we double click on that module, you'll see here's the code that it put in for what we just did. With is another way to look at something. I'm not going to talk about that today. It's starting to get more advanced, but this is an advantage of using the macro recorder to write our code for us. We don't have to understand it. We just know that it works because Excel wrote it. Here is essentially really what we're looking for is the dot color. So with your selection dot interior, another property of selection is dot interior, and that is the interior color, or well, actually all the interior. You can select the pattern, you can select the pattern color index. We're only interested in the color. So all we really need is that dot color part of the statement. So what I'm going to actually do is delete all this other stuff. We don't need, when we recorded the macro, we selected a new cell. We're not going to need to do that in our code, so I'm going to delete that. And then the same thing on, for the red color. So the first one was green, the second one was red. And we just need to understand that all we needed was the dot color in this case. So if this month is less than or equal to last month, we want to make it green. Well, that's our first set of commands here that it did. All you need to do, it's so easy, copy
Charles,
that out.
we have had a question come in about this step. Matthew wants to know, how is it that you know that you don't need those lines of code?
Because I guess probably some of it is experience, but I knew that all we wanted was the color. And you'll find as you record more macros and look at these things, you'll see, and a lot of times it's pretty self-apparent what it's trying to do. So you'll see, you know, just like that example, there are a lot of things that we weren't trying to do. For example, the interior pattern, I think it was 0. That just means there's no fill. We're not trying to change any of that. We just want to change the color. So we paste that exact line into our if then else statement for the green part. And then you'll recall we also needed if it's not less than or equal to, there's only one other option. It's going to be greater than. So else it's going to be red. Oops. And we can just paste that code in as well. And I'm just putting everything in the same place so it looks.
I-L, press 2 to skip.
Sorry about that. Answering machines going off. All right. So my apologies there. All right. So now we have code looking at if this month is less than or equal to last month, it's going to use that code that we recorded in the macro to turn it green. If otherwise, it's going to turn that color red. All right. So now we've dealt with the cell that we're on, but we need to do these other 15 cells. So before we increment the counter, we need to change what cell we're looking at, correct? And the way we do that is that same object, selection, And we want to look at one cell, one column over to the right. So that's your rows and your columns. So we're going to offset 0, 1. That's going to the right. And then we'll use that select method again to have Excel highlight the next cell. And then your last line of code obviously is your next counter. So the first time it goes through it, your counter is going to be 1. It's just going to look at the cell that's highlighted currently using selection. When it's done with all that code, it's going to move your selection 1 over to the right and increment the counter. So now counter's in 2, and it's going to do this 15 times until it gets to the very end. Once it's done it 15 times, it'll see that there's nothing else to do, and it'll end that subroutine. Whoops, better make that look better. And I know I'm probably going too fast for people to follow along, so I would highly encourage you, go to the YouTube when they post this and pause it as I talk through it so that you can work through these and see how all of this works as well. And it's not rushing by so quickly. The last thing we want to do is we want to be able to trigger this macro somehow. We no longer need the code that we recorded with the macro, so I'm going to remove that. I don't want to export it. You don't have to remove it. You can also rename this module to something more appropriate using the properties window down here. But again, just for the sake of time, we'll start testing this. But we want a way to run that macro now. And I'm going to highlight these back to no fill. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make something that the user can use to trigger that macro. And the way we do that on the developer tab on your ribbon, there's an insert thing here, and it allows you to insert controls into your spreadsheet. The only one we're going to worry about today is the button, which is the very first one. We're going to insert a button, and you can draw it or you can hold the Alt key while you draw it, and that'll snap it to the grid, and it'll create a button for you and bring up something to select the macro that we just recorded. And I apologize, I wish I could show you the whole name, but it's going to be this this macro right here, the analyze expenses. So that's what we named our subroutine. Therefore, that's the name of the macro that it's going to run. So if we hit that and hit OK, it's anytime you push this button, it's going to run that macro. Now we want to make it a little bit more intuitive. Analyze expenses. Just do that by right-clicking and hitting Edit Text. And that allows you to change the text of the button. Now you'll recall we need to highlight the first cell of the month we want to do. Well, the first month doesn't have any previous month, so we won't worry about that one. But let's click the November 1st, 2019 and run our macro and see if that works. Oh boy. It should be enabled. Let's see. You'll want to make sure your macros are enabled before you try to run macros. Hang on one second. Enable content. That's how you enable macros on a macro enabled worksheet. All right, let's highlight that first thing and click our button and see if our macro worked. So great news. Looks like, yeah, this is less, it marked it green. This is more, marked it red, less, equal to, equal to, equal to. So now instead of having to go through each of those cells, you can just click the first one and your macro button is going to highlight all those cells for you, basically automating, almost automating anyway, that task for you, with the exception of selecting that first cell. And again, as I mentioned, there are ways to do that to start to get a little bit more advanced. So in conclusion, VBA can help you automate repetitive tasks and help you save time, focusing more on the value-added activities of the project management activities that you need to do. There are many resources on the web to help you along on your journey to further learn VBA. They will be at the back of the presentation that I think we'll be sending out. I highly recommend this Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions. The gentleman's name is Chris Mortimer. He runs a company out of the UK that does Excel automation for other companies. But he has a YouTube channel that's focused primarily on Excel VBA for beginners, and his series are fantastic. Recommend the series on the 30 for 30 series for absolute beginners. It takes you a bit more slowly through some of the foundational concepts and really gets you a feel for working with Excel and the VBA Editor and VBA Code itself. Microsoft's VBA Docs Excel VBA reference has every command, function, object, property, and method that you can ever think of in Visual Basic for applications is in there. Wall Street Mojo Excel is a great resource where users post questions. And as I mentioned, sometimes if I don't know how to do something, I will just Google it. Wall Street Mojo is very frequently is one of the results that come back. For example, sending an email, I'll type Excel VBA, how to send an email, and it'll come up with someone has probably asked that question before, and the community has responded with how to do that. Stack Overflow is another website, but they deal with a lot of languages, not just Excel VBA. And you're also free to contact me, amycharles@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you liked this, comment in the YouTube comment section after they post it. I'm not sure if they enable comments or not. But if folks are interested, I'd be happy to host a series on beginner VBA so that we can go through these more slowly. So with that, I'll turn it back over to our moderator. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you learned something.
Thank you, Charles. I'm going to go ahead and take the screen, start sharing my screen over here, and wrap this up. I know we only have a couple more minutes. I just want to thank Charles again for sharing his tips on working with Excel VBAs. I know Excel is a tool that spans all industries, and it's really a staple in any business. So I'm sure there's a lot of people who can take a lot out of that. I have the PDU codes up on my screen. I'm also going to go ahead and paste those in the chat so that you guys are able to take those and claim your 1 hour of technical PDU if you already have a credentials. And with all that being said, I just want to thank Charles one more time, and hope to see you all in the next Tech Thursday webinar. Stay safe and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you, Charles.
Take care, everybody. Have a great day.